The crystal vase shattered against the marble floor on a Thursday morning, and Emma Barry would forever associate the sound of breaking glass with the moment her carefully constructed life splintered beyond recognition. Before we dive into this emotional period romance, I want to ask you something from the heart. If you're here watching this story about second chances and hidden love, would you consider giving this channel a second chance too? We pour everything into bringing you these beautiful tales, but we need your help to keep going. Please take just 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It truly means the world to us, and it helps us bring you more stories like this one. Now, let's begin Emma's journey. The conservatory of Barry House had always been Emma's sanctuary. At 24, she had long since accepted her role as the practical daughter, the one who managed households while her younger sister Jessica captivated ballrooms. This Thursday morning found her among the hothouse orchids, their white blooms luminous in the spring sunlight that streamed through the glass panes. She hummed softly as she arranged the delicate flowers, mentally reviewing the seating arrangements for Jessica's wedding. 5 days. In 5 days, her beautiful sister would marry Spencer Hunt, Duke of Clerkenwell, in what their mother had declared the social triumph of the season. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Her father's roar shattered the peaceful morning like a cannon blast. Emma's hands jerked, and the Venetian crystal vase, her mother's prized possession, slipped from her fingers. It seemed to fall in slow motion, catching the light one final time before exploding against the marble floor in a spray of water, orchids, and glittering shards. Emma barely registered the destruction as she lifted her skirts and ran toward the study. Her heart hammered against her ribs with each step down the corridor. She burst through the mahogany doors to find her mother collapsed on the velvet settee, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other clutching at her pearl necklace as if it might anchor her to reality. Her father stood at the window, his broad shoulders rigid, his fist crushing a torn letter. "Father? Mama? What's happened?" Her mother's eyes, red-rimmed and wild, met hers. "Jessica," she whispered, the name barely audible. "She's gone to Gretna Green." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. Gone? But the wedding with that naval officer. Her father's voice was dangerously quiet now, which was somehow worse than his earlier explosion. Christopher Riley. Penniless. Nothing. Nobody. He turned, and Emma took an involuntary step backward. His face had gone an alarming shade of purple, the veins standing out at his temples. "The Duke arrives tomorrow. The wedding is Saturday. The contracts are signed. The Clerkenwell Shipping Consortium," his voice broke, "will be bankrupt. Emma. Utterly ruined." The word hung in the air like poison gas. Bankrupt. Emma's mind raced through the implications with the ruthless efficiency she'd learned from managing the household accounts, the investments her father had made, counting on the Duke's fortune to secure them, the political alliances, her brother Henry's commission in the Guards, purchased on credit, her 3 younger sisters' dowries, promised but not yet funded, her mother's family trust, which hinged specifically on Jessica's advantageous marriage. "The guests are already traveling," her mother moaned. "The Archbishop himself is coming. We cannot stop it. We cannot—" She dissolved into sobs. Emma moved to comfort her, but her father's voice stopped her cold. Emma must take Jessica's place. The words didn't make sense at first. Emma turned slowly, certain she'd misheard. But her mother's eyes had gone suddenly bright with desperate calculation, and her father's expression had shifted from rage to something harder, more resolved. I beg your pardon?" Emma's hands had gone numb. "You will marry the Duke on Saturday," her father said, not asking, commanding. "You will take your sister's place at the altar." "But father, I've never even met His Grace. He's been managing his estates in the north for 2 years." "Then He won't know the difference, will he? Her mother's voice had regained its edge, sharp with aristocratic practicality. Your sisters. Similar enough. He's marrying for duty, not love. What does it matter which Barry daughter fulfills the contract? Emma's stomach dropped away into nothing. She thought of the Duke, the man she'd heard described in Jessica's letters, remote, formal, consumed by his responsibilities. A man who'd agreed to this marriage through lawyers and correspondence, who'd never bothered to court his intended bride. A marriage of pure convenience, pure transaction. She'd resigned herself to spinsterhood years ago. While Jessica collected admirers like jewels, Emma had learned to value usefulness over beauty, competence over charm. No romantic prospects had ever materialized for the plain, practical Barry daughter. She'd made her peace with it, found purpose in managing the household, in being needed if not wanted. But this was something else entirely. Father, surely there must be another way. There is no other way. His fist slammed against the desk, making the inkwells jump. Jessica's selfishness will not destroy this family. 6 people depend on this alliance, Emma. Your brother, your sisters, your mother and I. His eyes narrowed with a cruelty she'd seen before, usually directed at incompetent servants or failed business ventures. You've spent your entire life being dutiful, sensible, unremarkable. Prove that duty means something now, when it actually matters. The words landed like blows. Unremarkable, when it actually matters. As if all her years of sacrifice, of self-effacement, had been mere rehearsal for this moment. Emma looked at her mother, searching for an ally, but found only pleading desperation. She looked at her father and saw only implacable demand. She thought of Henry, barely 18, dreaming of his military career, of Catherine, Margaret, and little Anne, who deserved their seasons, their chances at happiness. The weight of 6 lives settled onto her shoulders like chains. "Does the Duke know?" she asked quietly. "He will be informed upon his arrival tomorrow," her father said. "He is a practical man. He will understand the necessity." Practical, like Emma herself. How convenient. She stood there in the study, the morning sun now seeming harsh and exposing rather than gentle. Outside, birds sang their oblivious songs. Somewhere in Scotland, Jessica was probably laughing in the arms of her beloved naval officer, free and happy, and utterly unconcerned with the devastation she'd left behind. Emma walked back to the conservatory in a daze. The shattered vase still lay scattered. Across the marble, water pooling among the ruins, white orchids dying in the spreading damp. She stared at the destruction, this morning's simple beauty now reduced to something sharp and dangerous. No choice, no time, no escape. "Very well," she whispered to the broken glass and dying flowers. "I'll do it." 3 days of frantic activity blurred together like a fever dream. Emma stood on the dressmaker's platform in what should have been Jessica's wedding gown, trying not to flinch as pins pricked her skin. Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress, circled her with the focused intensity of a general planning a military campaign, muttering about inseams and bodices. "Miss Emma is taller," she said to no one in particular, her mouth full of pins. "And, less." She gestured vaguely at Emma's chest. "We'll need to take in the bust entirely and let down the hem. The silk roses will have to be repositioned." Emma stared at her reflection in the mirror. The gown had been designed for Jessica's petite, voluptuous figure. On Emma's taller, leaner frame, it hung awkwardly, requiring hours of alterations to transform it from one sister's dream into another sister's duty. "Hold still, miss," Mrs. Henderson commanded, jabbing another pin into the waistline. Through the window, Emma could see footmen rushing across the grounds. Letters were being dispatched to confused relatives. "Disregard previous announcements. Emma Barry will wed the Duke of Clerkenwell on Saturday." She imagined the gossip spreading like wildfire through London's drawing rooms. The whispers, the speculation, the scandal. The household staff had already begun their own whispering campaign. Emma caught pitying glances from maids, sympathetic headshakes from the butler. Even cook had pressed an extra pastry into her hand that morning, as if sugar could somehow sweeten this bitter draught. Her mother had taken command with terrifying efficiency, drilling Emma on proper duchess behavior between dress fittings. "You will address the Archbishop as Your Grace. You will curtsy to the Queen Mother, but not to Princess Adelaide. She's only a minor royal. You will not discuss politics at dinner. You will not express opinions on the Irish question. You will smile serenely and speak softly, and remember that a duchess is seen but rarely heard." Emma had nodded mechanically through each instruction, feeling herself being reshaped like the wedding gown, altered to fit a role she'd never sought. On the second night after her mother had finally retired, Emma slipped down to the library. If she was to marry this stranger, she should at least know who he was. She found surprisingly little. Spencer Hunt, Duke of Clerkenwell, had inherited his title at 19 after his father's sudden death in 1873. He was now 32, 13 years her senior. The business journals spoke of his ruthless acumen in modernizing the Clerkenwell shipping routes, his successful expansion into American trade. The society columns mentioned him rarely. He attended Parliament when necessary, but avoided balls, musicales, and the frivolous entertainments of the ton. One profile described him as formidably intelligent, but decidedly cold. Another noted, "The Duke of Clerkenwell is uninterested in society's pleasures, devoted entirely to duty and profit." There were no scandals attached to his name, no whispered affairs or known mistresses, no warmth, no passion, no hint of the man beneath the title. Emma closed the last journal with trembling hands. She was to marry a cold, distant stranger who had chosen her sister and been handed her instead, like a merchant accepting substitute goods when his first choice proved unavailable. The next morning, while searching for her pearl earrings, Emma discovered Jessica's abandoned correspondence in their shared vanity drawer. She knew she shouldn't read them. They were private, meant for Jessica's eyes alone. But her hands moved of their own, accord. Jessica's letters to Christopher Riley overflowed with emotion. "He sees me, not just the Barry fortune or the Barry connections. When he looks at me, I feel truly visible for the first time in my life." Another read, "I know mother and father will be furious, but I cannot marry a man I don't love. I cannot spend my life as an ornament in a loveless arrangement." The final letter was addressed to Duke Spencer himself, never sent. "Your Grace, I cannot marry you. I do not love you, and I suspect you do not love me. We would make each other miserable in our mutual indifference. Forgive me for this disgrace, but I must choose my own heart." Emma's chest constricted painfully. Jessica had been brave enough to choose love, to risk everything for her own happiness. While Emma, sensible, dutiful Emma, had only the strength for surrender. Her father avoided her entirely during those 3 days, as if she'd already been sold and the transaction needed no further discussion. He spoke to her only once, to confirm that Jessica's dowry and marriage contracts had been transferred to Emma's name. £50,000, investments in 3 railway companies, and the deed to the Barry summer house in Bath. The price of her future. Her mother tried to offer comfort over tea. "Many marriages begin without affection, darling, and grow into companionship over time. Your father and I barely knew each other when we wed." Emma wanted to point out that her mother had at least met her father before the wedding day, had been courted according to proper custom, but she held her tongue. What purpose would bitterness serve now? On Thursday afternoon, the Duke's response arrived. Emma stood in the morning room as her father read it aloud, his voice betraying no emotion. "I accept the substitution. Will arrive Thursday evening to meet my bride. Clerkenwell." 6 words, no comment on the scandal, no expression of disappointment or surprise, just cold acceptance of necessity, as if Emma were a replacement horse for one gone lame. "You see," her father said, folding the letter, "His Grace is a practical man. This will suit him perfectly well." Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She felt like livestock being traded at market, her worth measured purely in her ability to fulfill a contract. That night, unable to sleep, Emma found herself back in the conservatory where this nightmare had begun. Someone had cleaned up the shattered vase, but the memory of breaking glass still echoed in her mind. The orchids she'd arranged for Jessica's wedding breakfast stood in fresh water, their white blooms luminous in the moonlight. "I'm marrying a stranger who wanted my sister," she whispered to the flowers. "I'll be the wrong bride forever. Every time he looks at me, he'll see what he didn't choose." "Emma." She turned to find Margaret in the doorway, her younger sister's face soft with concern. At 16, Margaret still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. "You should be asleep," Emma said, wiping hastily at her eyes. Margaret crossed the conservatory and took Emma's cold hands in her warm ones. "Maybe he'll surprise you. Maybe it won't be as terrible as you think. Perhaps he'll... Or maybe it will be worse." The words came out harsher than Emma intended. She softened her voice. "I'm sorry, darling. I'm just frightened." "I know." Margaret squeezed her hands. "But you're the bravest person I know." Emma almost laughed at that. Brave. She was simply out of choices. Now, as Thursday evening descended and her mother's lady's maid fastened her into a pale blue gown, "It brings out your eyes, darling. You must look your best." Emma's hands trembled so badly she could barely clasp her necklace. In less than an hour, she would meet the Duke of Clerkenwell, the man who would become her husband in 2 days, the man who had wanted her sister, the stranger who would own her future. The clock in the entrance hall struck 6, each chime reverberating through Emma's chest like a funeral bell. She stood beside her mother in the drawing room, spine rigid, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Through the window she could see the Duke's carriage on the gravel drive, horses stamping and snorting after their journey from the north. Her life was about to change forever. "Remember," her mother whispered, adjusting Emma's sleeve. "Speak softly, no opinions. Let him lead the conversation." The butler's voice rang out from the hallway. "The Duke of Clerkenwell, Your Grace." Emma and her mother sank into deep curtsies as the drawing-room doors opened. Emma kept her eyes lowered, staring at the Turkish carpet beneath her feet, afraid to look up, afraid to see disappointment or cold indifference in the man who would be her husband. Footsteps crossed the threshold. Confident, unhurried, she forced herself to raise her eyes. Her breath stopped completely. Spencer Hunt, Duke of Clerkenwell, stood in the doorway, and he was nothing, absolutely nothing, like she'd expected. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the lean but broad-shouldered build of a man who spent more time managing estates than languishing in drawing rooms. Dark hair fell across his forehead, slightly disheveled from riding, as if he'd pushed his hand through it repeatedly. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and amber eyes that seemed to glow in the lamplight like a predator's. He was devastatingly handsome in an unconventional, dangerous way. Magnetic. The kind of man who commanded attention simply by existing. And he was not cold. Not cold at all. Those burning amber eyes swept the room and landed on Emma. His formal expression, polite, distant, shattered completely into stunned recognition. Something that looked like relief flooded his features. No, not relief. Something deeper, more visceral. Something that made Emma's stomach flip and her skin flush hot. Hunger, mixed with disbelief, as if he'd been searching for something precious and had suddenly, impossibly, found it. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, completely ignoring her mother's presence. Emma's heart hammered so violently she was certain he could hear it. He took her hand, bowed over it with perfect formality, but there was nothing formal about the way his thumb brushed deliberately across her knuckles. Lingering, intentional. "Miss Emma Barry," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer answered, like salvation after years of drought. Heat flooded up her arm from where his skin touched hers. She managed a curtsy, though her legs felt unsteady. "Your Grace, I trust your journey was tolerable?" His eyes never left her face, studying her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. "More than tolerable," he said quietly. "Now." Her mother cleared her throat loudly. "Perhaps refreshment after your travels, Your Grace? Cook has prepared—" "Thank you, Lady Barry," Spencer interrupted smoothly, still not, looking away from Emma. "But I wonder if I might speak with Miss Barry privately. A turn in the gardens, perhaps?" He wasn't asking permission. He was stating intent. Lady Barry's mouth compressed into a thin line, but social protocol demanded she agree. "Of course, Your Grace. The rose arbor is particularly lovely at this hour." Spencer offered Emma his arm. She placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fine wool of his riding coat. His other hand came to rest at the small of her back, warm through all the layers of her gown, and guided her toward the French doors leading to the gardens. They walked in silence down the gravel path. Emma was acutely, overwhelmingly aware of everything about him: the scent of cedar and smoke clinging to his clothes, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he towered over her despite her own considerable height. The gardens were empty, servants conspicuously absent. She was alone with this stranger, this overwhelming, intense, utterly unexpected stranger. The full weight of that reality pressed down on her. They reached the rose arbor, evening shadows lengthening across the carefully manicured beds. Spencer stopped, releasing her arm, and turned to face her fully. "I should apologize," he said abruptly. Emma blinked. "For what, Your Grace?" "For this entire situation." His jaw tightened. "You've been thrust into a marriage not of your choosing, forced to take your sister's place as if you were an interchangeable commodity. It's unconscionable." Emma swallowed hard. "I understand my duty, Your Grace." "Do you?" Those amber eyes searched her face with unnerving perception. "Because I'm not certain you understand what you've agreed to." Her pulse quickened with apprehension. "I know this marriage is one of convenience, of necessity. I don't expect—" She faltered, unable to say the words aloud. "Romance, affection, love." "I should tell you something about myself," Spencer continued, stepping closer. "I'm not an easy man. I'm direct to the point of rudeness. I find society tedious and most conversation vapid. I prefer ledgers to musicales, business correspondence to poetry." Emma waited for the inevitable conclusion. "This won't be a love match. I'll provide for you, but don't expect my heart." Instead, Spencer moved even closer, his voice dropping to something rough and intimate. "But I need you to know something, Miss Barry, something unconscionable." Her breath caught. "When I received your father's message about Jessica's elopement, that you would take her place." He paused, watching her reaction. Emma braced herself for disappointment, for anger at the substitution, for the cold acceptance she'd read in his 6-word letter. "I felt nothing but profound relief." The words didn't make sense. Emma stared at him, unable to process what he'd said. "Relief? Your bride abandoned you for another man. The scandal—" "A bride I never wanted," Spencer said bluntly. Emma's mouth went dry. "But you agreed to marry her. The contracts—" "Your sister is lovely, I'm sure," he interrupted, taking another step closer. They were nearly touching now, close enough that Emma could see gold flecks in his amber eyes. But every letter I received from her, every interaction we had through lawyers and intermediaries, I found myself wondering. He stopped, his jaw clenching, a muscle jumping in his cheek. Those burning eyes pinned her in place, wondering about someone else entirely. Emma's world tilted on its axis. The roses, the sunset, the very ground beneath her feet seemed to shift. I don't understand. Spencer reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. His fingers brushed her cheek, feather light, and Emma's entire body erupted in sensation. "Thank God it's you," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion that contradicted everything she'd been told about the cold Duke of Clerkenwell. And Emma realized with stunning, terrifying clarity that nothing about this marriage would be what she'd expected. The next 3 days passed in a fever dream of stolen moments and racing hearts. Spencer called at Barry House every morning at 9 without fail, arriving with the punctuality of a man for whom time was precious and not to be wasted. But he didn't bring the expected courtship gifts. No jewelry, no hothouse roses, no expensive trinkets meant to impress. Instead, he brought books. The first morning, it was a rare botanical text Emma had mentioned wanting to read during their garden walk. The second, a collection of philosophy treatises by Marcus Aurelius with annotations in Spencer's own hand. The third, a volume of poetry so obscure Emma had never even heard of the author. Each gift felt like a declaration. I see you. I know you. I'm paying attention. Her mother watched these exchanges with visible confusion, clearly expecting the Duke to woo her daughter with diamonds and declarations, not intellectual discourse. But Emma felt more treasured receiving those books than she would have felt draped in jewels. They walked the grounds each afternoon, the May sunshine warm on their shoulders. Spencer asked her opinions on estate management, not patronizingly, but as if her thoughts actually mattered. They debated the merits of Kant versus Hume, argued about land reform policies, discussed crop rotation strategies Emma had read about in agricultural journals. He treated her like an intellectual equal, like someone whose mind was as valuable as her dowry. Emma found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in weeks. Found herself arguing passionately about tenant rights and poor relief. Found herself feeling desperately, dangerously alive. Her mother continued her vigil at the drawing room windows, bewildered by the obvious chemistry crackling between them. On the third evening, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Spencer took Emma's arm and guided her to the stone terrace overlooking the Sur grounds. They'd been walking for nearly an hour, the tension between them building with each passing moment until Emma felt she might catch fire from the electricity of his nearness. "I need to tell you something," Spencer said abruptly, his voice tight with emotion he could no longer contain. Emma turned to face him fully, her heart already racing. 4 years ago, he continued, amber eyes locked on hers, I attended a house party at Thornfield Manor in Derbyshire. Do you remember? The world seemed to stop spinning. Memory flooded back like a dam breaking. She'd been 20 years old, dragged reluctantly to a weekend party her mother insisted she attend. While the other guests danced and flirted, Emma had hidden from the festivities during a violent thunderstorm, seeking refuge in the library with her book. A stranger had entered, soaked from the rain, dark hair dripping water onto the Persian carpet. They'd talked for 3 hours, about everything and nothing. Books and politics, and dreams and fears, and hopes for the future. A connection unlike anything Emma had ever felt, as if she'd found the other half of her soul in a rain-soaked stranger whose name she never learned. "The library," Emma whispered, her hand flying to her throat. "During the storm." "Yes." Spencer's voice was rough with remembered longing. "He never told me his name," Emma breathed, the pieces clicking into place with devastating precision. "You never told me your name." I was going to. Spencer stepped closer, his expression raw and open in a way that made Emma's chest ache. But I was summoned away. Emergency with my steward. Tenant cottage fire. By the time I returned, you were gone, Emma finished. I looked for you the next morning. I asked everyone at breakfast who the tall man in the library had been. No one knew. Because I'd been called away to my estates before dawn. Spencer's hands clenched at his sides as if stopping himself from reaching for her. I returned to that library 7 times over the next 2 days, hoping you'd come back, searching every room, every garden path. His voice broke slightly. But you'd left early. Your mother had taken ill. I learned that later. I didn't even know your full name, just Emma. Do you know how many Emmas there are in English society? Emma's eyes filled with tears. I thought about that afternoon for months, the man who talked about Aristotle with rain in his hair, who laughed at my terrible jokes about Socrates, who looked at me like I was fascinating instead of... Instead of what? Spencer demanded. Instead of plain, Emma whispered. Practical. Unremarkable. Spencer's expression turned thunderous. You are none of those things. You never were. He moved closer still, close enough that Emma could feel the heat radiating from him. That afternoon, I thought I'd met the most extraordinary woman I'd ever encountered. For 4 years, I convinced myself I'd imagined how perfect you were. That memory had embellished reality. And, Emma barely managed the word, and I was wrong. His amber eyes burned into hers. You're more extraordinary than I remembered. The stranger she'd never forgotten was him, the Duke her sister was supposed to marry, the man now standing before her, looking at her like she was something precious and rare. That was real? She breathed. I didn't imagine the connection. It was the most real thing that ever happened to me, Spencer said with devastating sincerity. He lifted his hand slowly to her face, cupping her cheek with such tenderness that Emma trembled. His thumb traced her cheekbone, her jaw learning the shape of her. Emma, he said, using her Christian name for the first time since that long-ago afternoon. The intimacy of it sent heat flooding through her entire body. I need to know, he continued, voice dropping to something almost desperate. Did you feel it too? That afternoon in the library? Emma's breath came short and fast. Yes. I felt like I'd found something I didn't know I was searching for. And after? I went home and couldn't stop thinking about you for months. The confession spilled out. I kept hoping I'd see you at balls, at parties. I scanned every crowd looking for your face. Eventually, I convinced myself to stop looking. Spencer's thumb traced her lower lip, making her gasp. And now, here we are. Here we are, Emma echoed weakly. Spencer leaned down, his mouth hovering inches from hers. Emma's eyes fluttered closed, her lips parting in anticipation. She could feel his breath on her skin, warm and unsteady. The world had narrowed to just this, the space between their mouths, the thundering of her heart, the promise of, Emma, it's getting late. Her mother's voice from the terrace doors shattered the moment like breaking glass. They sprang apart, both breathing hard. Spencer laughed, the sound frustrated and rueful. Your mother has impeccable timing. Emma pressed her hand to her racing heart, trying to compose herself. She's been watching us like a hawk. With good reason, Spencer said quietly, his eyes still dark with unfulfilled desire. If she'd arrived 30 seconds later. He left the sentence unfinished, but Emma understood perfectly. As Spencer prepared to leave, he took both her hands in his grip warm and sure. Tomorrow. I have more to tell you. More? Emma couldn't imagine what else there could possibly be. About that house party. His expression darkened, something troubled crossing his features. "About what happened after I searched for you. About when I met your family 2 years ago." Emma's brow furrowed. 2 years ago? "Your father came to me with a business proposal." Spencer's jaw tightened. "About a marriage alliance between our families. About what your father said when I asked." He stopped, shaking his head. "Tomorrow. I'll explain everything tomorrow." He kissed her knuckles, his lips lingering against her skin. Then he was gone, leaving Emma standing on the terrace with more questions than answers. That night, Emma lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling as her mind raced. What had her father said 2 years ago? Why had Spencer agreed to marry Jessica if he'd been thinking about Emma for 4 years? What proposal had her father made, and why did Spencer look so troubled remembering it? Tomorrow felt impossibly far away. "I need to pause here and ask you something. Are you feeling what Emma's feeling right now? That mix of hope and fear, of finally understanding but dreading what comes next? If this story is touching your heart, please help it touch more hearts by subscribing to this channel. We're a small community, but we pour everything into these stories. Hit that like button, drop a comment about what you think Spencer will reveal, and share this with someone who loves period romance. Every subscription helps us continue bringing you these emotional journeys. Now, let's find out what truth Spencer has been carrying. The night before her wedding, Emma received a note slipped under her bedroom door. Spencer's handwriting, bold and unmistakable. "Meet me in the conservatory when your family retires. Please, I must speak with you." She waited until the house fell silent, then slipped from her room wearing only her dressing gown, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the night chill. The conservatory glowed with moonlight, painting the orchids silver and casting long shadows across the marble floor. Spencer was waiting among the flowers, still fully dressed, pacing like a caged animal. When he heard her footsteps, he turned, and Emma's breath caught. She'd never seen him like this, hands trembling, jaw tight with barely contained emotion, eyes wild with something that looked like desperation. "I need to tell you everything before tomorrow," he said without preamble. "Before we stand in that church and bind ourselves together. You need to know the truth about why I'm really, marrying you." Emma's stomach dropped. Here it came, the confession that he was settling, making the best of a bad situation, that she was a convenient replacement and nothing more. "Tell me," she said, lifting her chin with false bravery. Spencer ran a hand through his dark hair, disheveling it further. 2 years ago, your father approached me about an alliance between our families, a marriage to unite the Barry fortune with Clerkenwell influence. Emma nodded. She knew this much. "I leapt at the chance," Spencer continued, his voice rough, "because I thought, perhaps foolishly, that maybe the Emma from the library was his daughter, that fate had given me a way to find you again." Emma's heart began to pound. "When I arrived for negotiations, I met Jessica first. Your father presented her as the daughter to be wed." Spencer's hands clenched into fists. "And then you walked in to serve tea." The memory surfaced with crystalline clarity. Emma carrying the tea service, looking up to see the Duke of Clerkenwell staring at her as if he'd seen a ghost. She'd thought he was merely surprised by the interruption. "I nearly forgot to breathe," Spencer said. "It was you, the woman from the rainstorm, the woman I'd been searching for." Emma's eyes flooded with tears. "I remember, you stared at me like I'd found something precious I'd thought lost forever." Spencer crossed to her in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "I immediately told your father I wished to marry you instead." Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I told him I'd met you before, that we'd connected, that you were the daughter I wanted as my duchess." Spencer's voice turned bitter, laced with old fury. "Do you know what he said?" Emma shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He said Jessica was younger, prettier, more suitable for a duchess, that you were too bookish, too serious, too plain." Each word landed like a blow. That a man of my status deserved better than his eldest daughter, who'd been passed over by every eligible man in society. A sob broke free from Emma's chest. Hearing her father's dismissal through Spencer's words was somehow worse than experiencing it firsthand. "He said you were useful for managing the household, but not for marriage to a duke," Spencer continued, his voice shaking with remembered rage. "He refused to even consider it. When I pressed, when I told him I didn't care about any of those things, he threatened to cancel the entire alliance." "So, you agreed to marry Jessica?" Emma whispered. "I agreed to marry Jessica," Spencer confirmed, his voice breaking, "because I couldn't bear to lose access to your family entirely. I thought if I married your sister, I'd see you at family gatherings. I'd have glimpses of you across dinner tables. It would be torture, but it would be something." Emma's knees weakened. "That's why you left for the north immediately after the betrothal?" "I couldn't watch wedding preparations that felt like a death sentence," Spencer said. "I spent 2 years managing estates, trying to convince myself I'd been foolish, that I'd built you up in my mind. That one afternoon couldn't possibly mean what I thought it did." He grabbed her hands desperately, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "Then your father's message arrived. Jessica had eloped. You would take her place. I rode for 3 days straight, barely stopped to rest the horses, not because of duty or contracts or family honor." "Then why?" Emma could barely form the words. "Because finally, I could have what I'd wanted from the beginning." Spencer's amber eyes burned into hers. "You, Emma. It was always you. I chose you 4 years ago in that library. I chose you 2 years ago when I begged your father, and I'm choosing you now, not as a substitute, but as the only woman I've ever wanted." Emma pulled back, fury mixing with her heartbreak. "You let him call me plain and unsuitable, and said nothing more to defend me?" "I said everything." Spencer's voice rose with desperation. "I told him you were brilliant and captivating, that you had the sharpest mind I'd ever encountered, that your beauty was the kind that mattered, intelligence, wit, genuine warmth, and—" He laughed at me, called me a fool, said I was fixating on the wrong daughter because of some brief conversation I'd over-romanticized in my memory. Emma crumpled, all the fight draining from her. "I spent 2 years thinking I wasn't enough, watching Jessica prepare to marry you, thinking you were perfect for her, believing I'd never be wanted like that." Spencer cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. "You were wanted. You were always wanted. By me. Every single day for 4 years." "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma whispered. "When you arrived, why didn't you explain?" "Because I was afraid," Spencer admitted. "Afraid you'd think I was lying to make the best of the situation. Afraid you wouldn't believe that I'd been thinking about you all this time. Afraid that maybe you didn't feel the same way." Emma's tears fell faster. "I felt the same way. I've been half in love with a stranger for 4 years." Spencer's thumb brushed away her tears. "I'm not marrying you because I have to, Emma. I'm marrying you because 4 years ago, a woman with ink-stained fingers talked to me about philosophy in a thunderstorm, and I've been half in love with her ever since." "Half?" Emma managed through her tears. Spencer's smile was crooked, vulnerable. "Perhaps more than half." Emma's world had turned inside out, and she was drowning in revelation. She stared at Spencer, trying to reconcile everything. The Duke who'd been contracted to marry Jessica, the stranger from the library who'd talked about philosophy during a rainstorm, and the man standing before her now, looking at her as if she were the answer to every prayer he'd never dared speak aloud. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was terrified you wouldn't believe me," Spencer admitted, his hands still cradling her face. "Or worse, that you'd think I was lying to make the best of a bad situation, that I was simply trying to salvage my pride after being abandoned." Emma reached up tentatively, her fingers trembling as they traced the sharp line of his jaw. "You really chose me? Even when my father said those things?" Spencer leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly as if savoring the contact. "Especially then. Because I knew he was wrong about everything. You are extraordinary, Emma. You always have been." "I've thought about that afternoon too," Emma confessed, the words tumbling out now that honesty had broken through propriety's barriers. "The stranger in the library who actually listened to me, who talked to me like I mattered, like my thoughts were valuable rather than peculiar." She took a shaky breath. "I compared every man I met after that to you. They all fell short. Every single one." Spencer's expression turned pained. 2 years, Emma. 2 years we could have had together if your father hadn't been so ambitious for Jessica, if propriety hadn't demanded the younger daughter couldn't marry before the elder." "You've been angry," Emma observed quietly. "Furious," Spencer confirmed. "At your father for his cruelty, at society for its ridiculous conventions, at myself for agreeing to marry Jessica instead of walking away entirely." "And at Jessica?" Spencer considered the question carefully. "No, not at Jessica. She didn't know any of this. She was as much a pawn in your father's schemes as we were." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And in a way, her running away with Lieutenant Riley gave us this chance." Emma's laugh was bitter and bright at once. "She freed us both, didn't she? From a marriage neither of you wanted." "She gave me you," Spencer said simply. "I'll be grateful to her for that, for the rest of my life." Emma gathered her courage, her heart thundering so violently she was certain he could hear it. "Spencer," she whispered, using his Christian name for the first time. His eyes darkened at the sound of his name on her lips. "You said you've been half in love with me," she continued. "What about the other half?" Spencer pulled her flush against him, both hands moving to frame her face with devastating tenderness. Emma could feel the solid warmth of his body through the thin fabric of her dressing gown, could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. "The other half has been fighting it," he said roughly, "trying to protect myself from wanting what I thought I could never have, building walls around my heart so it wouldn't break completely." He paused, his amber eyes searching hers with naked vulnerability. "But standing here now with you in my arms, with tomorrow finally coming after 4 years of waiting—" "Yes?" Emma breathed. "I'm completely in love with you, Emma. Wholly, utterly, desperately in love. I have been since the moment you laughed at my terrible joke about Plato's cave allegory." Emma rose on her toes, her hands fisting in the lapels of his coat, pulling him down toward her. "I love you too. I think I've loved you since the rainstorm. I just didn't know I was allowed to." Spencer's breath shuddered out of him. "You're allowed. God, Emma, you're allowed." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste, formal kiss Emma had imagined would mark her wedding day. This was years of longing compressed into a single moment, hungry, desperate, claiming. Spencer kissed her as if she were air and he'd been drowning, as if she were light and he'd been lost in darkness. Emma kissed him back with a passion she hadn't known she possessed, threading her fingers through his dark hair, pressing her body into his, opening herself to the overwhelming tide of sensation. She felt his arms tighten around her waist, lifting her slightly, off the ground. They were both trembling, hearts racing, the world spinning away until nothing existed except this. His mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, the desperate, glorious reality of being wanted. When they finally broke apart, both gasping for air, Spencer rested his forehead against hers. Their breath mingled in the small space between them. "Tomorrow cannot come quickly enough," he murmured against her lips. "Tomorrow," Emma agreed, "and every day after that. I will spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice," Spencer promised. Emma's smile was soft and sure. "You already have. You chose me when no one else did, when my own father didn't think me worthy." "I will never stop choosing you," Spencer vowed, his voice fierce with conviction. "Every day, for the rest of our lives, I will choose you." Reality intruded as it always must. Emma pulled back slightly, worry creasing her brow. What will people say? About the substitution, the scandal, the whispers that will follow us? Spencer's expression turned dismissive. "Let them talk. I don't care about anyone's opinion but yours." He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You are going to be my duchess, my wife, my partner in everything, and I will make certain everyone knows you are exactly who I want, that you were always who I wanted." A sound from the house made them both freeze, someone stirring, footsteps on the floor above. "You should go," Spencer said reluctantly. "We can't be discovered here like this, not before tomorrow." Emma nodded, though every fiber of her being protested the separation. Spencer kissed her once more, gently this time, with reverence rather than passion. "Sleep well, my Emma," he whispered against her hair. "Tomorrow you become mine officially." Emma's smile bloomed like the orchids surrounding them. "I've been yours since the rainstorm. Tomorrow just makes it legal." She slipped from his arms and moved toward the conservatory door, pausing once to look back. Spencer stood among the white flowers in the moonlight, watching her with such naked adoration that her breath caught. Then she was running through the silent house, bare feet soundless on the carpet, her heart soaring with impossible joy. She reached her bedroom and closed the door softly behind her, leaning against it as her fingers rose to touch her lips, still tingling from his kisses, still remembering the taste of him. She wasn't the substitute bride. She had never been the substitute. She was his first choice, his only choice. The woman he'd been searching for across 4 years and countless miles, the woman he'd agreed to torture himself for just to catch glimpses of across dinner tables. Tomorrow, Emma would walk down the aisle to marry Spencer Hunt, Duke of Clerkenwell, and she would do so knowing that every step brought her closer not to duty or obligation, but to love. The kind of love she'd thought existed only in novels, the kind of love that had been waiting for her all along in a rain-soaked library during a thunderstorm. She climbed into bed with a smile on her face, and for the first time in a week, she fell asleep without a single tear. Saturday morning dawned bright and cold, autumn sun gilding everything in gold. Emma stood before the mirror in her room while her mother and sisters helped her dress in Jessica's altered gown. White silk cascaded down her taller frame, tiny pearl buttons climbing up her back like a delicate ladder. The lace veil that had been in the Barry family for 3 generations settled over her dark hair like morning mist. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her, not because of the gown or the veil, but because of the light in her eyes, the certainty where there had been resignation, the joy where there had been dread. "You look beautiful, Emma," her mother said softly, adjusting the veil with gentle fingers. It was the first compliment Emma could remember receiving from her. The words hung in the air between them, precious and unexpected. "I'm sorry," Lady Barry added quietly, her hands stilling on Emma's shoulders, "for not seeing you clearly before, for letting your father dictate who was worthy and who was not." Emma's throat tightened. "You see me now, that's what matters." Her father would walk her down the aisle out of duty, but he'd been cold and distant since Spencer's obvious preference for Emma had become undeniable. His ambitions for Jessica thwarted, his judgment proven catastrophically wrong. Emma realized with startling clarity that she didn't need his approval anymore. She had something far more valuable: Spencer's love. The church was smaller than expected. Many guests had withdrawn their acceptances upon hearing of the substitution, leaving the pews half empty with only scattered relatives and family friends. As Emma entered on her father's arm, she heard the whispers behind silk fans. Scandal. Desperation. Poor substitute. Her step faltered. Her father offered his arm stiffly, mechanically, and they started down the aisle. The whispers intensified with each step. Emma wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the floor. Then she saw Spencer at the altar. He stood in formal dress, his dark coat and cravat emphasizing his height and the breadth of his shoulders. But it was his eyes, those amber eyes, that stopped her heart. They were locked on her with such open love, such undisguised devotion, that the whispers faded to nothing. He watched her approach as if she were the only person in the world. Hunger and devotion and fierce possession blazed in his gaze, transforming his usually composed features into something raw and honest. Emma saw nothing else, only him. When they reached the altar, her father placed Emma's hand in Spencer's. Spencer's fingers closed around hers immediately, possessively, tenderly, and he leaned down to whisper against her ear. "You are so beautiful. You are biased," Emma whispered back. His smile was quick and brilliant. "Completely." The vicar began the ceremony, his words blurring together. Promises to love, honor, obey. Emma noticed Spencer's jaw tighten at the word obey, but he said nothing. Later, he would tell her he despised the notion, that he wanted a partner, not a subject. She heard herself making vows that felt sacred and true, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Spencer's voice was strong and certain when he pledged himself to her, each word carrying the weight of 4 years of waiting. Then, before the vicar could pronounce them married, Spencer turned to face the congregation. Emma's heart stopped. What was he doing? Spencer raised their joined hands and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Before we complete these vows, I want everyone here to know something." Gasps rippled through the church. Emma felt her face flush hot. "Emma is not a substitute," Spencer declared, his voice ringing with authority. "She is not a second choice." The whispers died completely, replaced by shocked silence. "She is the woman I have wanted to marry since the moment I met her." His eyes found Emma's father in the front pew. "She is my choice, my equal, my everything." Emma's mother began crying into her handkerchief. Margaret beamed from her seat, barely containing her delight. Her father's face had gone stricken, perhaps finally realizing what he had almost cost them both. The vicar, flustered, hastily pronounced them man and wife. Spencer pulled Emma into his arms and kissed her with such thorough passion that half the congregation gasped audibly. The other half tittered behind gloved hands. Emma didn't care. She kissed her husband back with everything she had, claiming him as publicly as he had claimed her. They walked down the aisle together, married at last. Emma saw the faces differently now, some envious, some genuinely happy for them. She no longer felt like a substitute. She felt like a victor. She had fought no battle, yet won anyway. The wedding breakfast was surprisingly joyful despite the reduced guest list. Whatever prepared gossip had existed seemed to evaporate in the face of Spencer and Emma's obvious devotion. They could barely stop touching, his hand at her waist, her fingers resting in his, their eyes constantly seeking each other across the room. Even the most hardened gossips had to admit they'd never seen a couple more besotted. Near the end of the breakfast, Emma's father approached stiffly. "Your Grace," he addressed Spencer with formal coldness. I want to... I need to acknowledge... He struggled with the words, pride warring visibly with regret. Spencer's response was politely glacial. Yes, Mr. Barry? No warmth, no forgiveness yet. Emma touched his arm gently, silently communicating that this was her choice to make, peace or continued estrangement. She looked at her father, the man who had dismissed her, called her plain and unsuitable, who had valued social advancement over his daughter's worth. "Father," she said quietly, "what's done is done. I'm happy now. That's what matters." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't forgiveness. It was simply choosing to move forward. Her father nodded and retreated with evident relief he didn't deserve. Finally, it was time to leave for Spencer's estate, where they would spend their wedding night. The carriage waited outside, servants loading trunks with military efficiency. Emma said goodbye to her family, lingering longest with Margaret. "I told you he'd surprise you," Margaret whispered, embracing her tightly. Emma laughed, the sound bright and free. "You had no idea how much." She climbed into the carriage, Spencer following immediately after. The door closed, sealing them away from the world. His hand covered hers on the seat between them, warm and sure. "Ready to go home, Duchess?" he asked, the title still new and strange on his lips. Emma looked at him, this man who had searched for her across years and miles, who had chosen her when no one else had, who loved her not despite her supposedly plain features and bookish nature, but because of everything she was. "I'm already home," she said softly. "Wherever you are." The ducal estate appeared through evening mist like something from a dream. A sprawling manor house set among ancient oaks, its windows glowing warm against the gathering darkness. Emma had seen it once before, years ago, but never imagined she would arrive as its mistress. Spencer helped her from the carriage, his hand lingering at her waist in a way that sent heat spiraling through her. The entrance was magnificent. Servants lined up in formal array to greet their new duchess. Emma should have been nervous, overwhelmed by the responsibility settling onto her shoulders. Instead, she felt only anticipation. Spencer dismissed the staff with curt efficiency, clearly wanting her alone. He led her up the grand staircase through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, until they reached a set of carved mahogany doors. His private chambers, their private chambers now. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and they were finally, truly alone. No chaperones, no interruptions, no propriety demanding distance. Emma's breath caught as Spencer turned to face her, amber eyes dark with desire that had been carefully leashed all day. "I've been wanting to do this properly all day," he said, voice rough. He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. Emma stood her ground, heart racing as he reached for the first of the tiny pearl buttons running down her back. Spencer undressed her with reverent care, his fingers patient with each fastening. Each layer was removed slowly, deliberately. The veil, the gown, the petticoats, the corset. He mapped every curve revealed with his hands first, then his mouth, whispering against her skin how beautiful she was, how long he'd imagined this moment. Emma trembled under his ministrations, and Spencer paused immediately, pulling back to search her face. "We don't have to rush," he murmured, kissing her temple with exquisite tenderness. "We have the rest of our lives." "I want to," Emma said, her hands fisting in his shirt. "I've waited 4 years too, Spencer. I'm done waiting." He carried her to the bed, and what followed was both tender and fierce, awkward and perfect. Spencer moved inside her with exquisite care, whispering love against her skin with every thrust. Emma gasped at the initial discomfort, then at the pleasure that built and built until she understood for the first time what it meant to be truly known by another person. This wasn't duty, this wasn't obligation, this was pure love, expressed in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Spencer's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. His other arm was secured around her waist, holding her close as if afraid she might vanish. "I cannot believe you're mine," he murmured into her hair. Emma laughed softly. "I cannot believe my family let me keep you." "Let you?" Spencer's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "You didn't convince them, Emma. They forced you into this marriage." "Best thing they ever forced me to do, then." Emma propped herself up on one elbow, suddenly serious. Spencer looked up at her, his expression questioning. "I need to know something," she said. "Anything." "If Jessica hadn't eloped, if you'd married her as planned—" Emma paused, gathering courage. "Would you have been faithful to her?" Silence stretched between them. Spencer considered the question carefully, his jaw working. "Yes," he said finally. "I would have honored my vows, even though it would have been torture. Seeing you at family gatherings, watching you eventually marry someone else, knowing I could never have what I wanted." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I would have kept my distance, never acted on what I felt." Relief flooded through Emma. "Good, because I couldn't love a man who would betray his vows, regardless of circumstance." Spencer kissed her forehead. "You are remarkable." "I'm practical," Emma corrected, "and pragmatic, and apparently extraordinarily fortunate." They made love again as the moon rose outside the windows, slower this time, learning each other's preferences. Spencer discovered the sensitive spot behind Emma's ear that made her gasp. She learned that beneath his harsh exterior lived a heart that craved touch and reassurance as much as passion, that he needed to be held as much as he needed to claim. As the hours passed, they talked, trading stories and secrets in the darkness. Spencer described his lonely childhood, cold parents who saw him only as an heir, never a son. The crushing weight of inheriting a dukedom at 19, the isolation of being surrounded by people who wanted things from him but never simply wanted him. Emma confessed her terror of never being enough, of always being overlooked in favor of prettier, more charming sisters, of feeling invisible in her own home. "You were never invisible to me," Spencer said fiercely. "From the moment you walked into that library, you were the only person I could see." They discovered shared loves beyond the physical, astronomy and ancient history, dark humor and philosophical debate, a perfect compatibility that extended far beyond their bodies. As dawn began to paint the sky with streaks of pink and gold, Spencer pulled Emma against his chest, his arms secure around her waist in a gesture that was already becoming familiar. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being brave enough to take Jessica's place, for giving me the chance to court you properly, for loving me despite everything, my coldness with others, my difficult temperament, my complete inability to function in society." Emma turned in his arms to meet his amber eyes in the early morning light. "Thank you for choosing me first, for seeing me when everyone else looked at Jessica, for being the kind of man worth loving, the kind who honors his commitments, who values intelligence over beauty, who waited 4 years for someone he met once." "Twice," Spencer corrected with a small smile. "Once in a rainstorm, once in scandal." "Twice," Emma agreed, "and I'm never letting you go again." "Promise?" "I promise." They fell asleep wrapped together as the sun rose fully over the ducal estate, two people who had found each other against all odds and refused to let propriety or cruelty or time keep them apart. Two people who had discovered that sometimes the wrong bride is actually exactly the right one. She was simply waiting for the right groom to recognize her worth. In the conservatory at Barry House, the white orchids Emma had arranged a week ago still bloomed in their vases. The shattered crystal had been swept away, the water mopped up, the evidence of that Thursday morning's devastation erased. But Emma would always remember the sound of breaking glass as the moment her old life ended and her real life, the one she was meant to live, finally began. Before we reach the end of Emma and Spencer's story, I want to thank you for being here. If you've watched this far, you've invested in their love story, and that means everything to us. But here's the truth. This channel struggles to grow without your help. We need you to do more than just watch. We need you to subscribe, to like, to comment, and tell us what this story meant to you. Share it with your friends who love romance. Help us reach more people who need these stories of hope and second chances. Your support literally keeps these stories alive. Now, let's see how Emma and Spencer's forever unfolds. 3 years had passed since the wedding that shocked society. Hollingsworth Hall stood on the cliffs of Devonshire, a Gothic revival masterpiece overlooking the endless sea. Emma had transformed it from a cold showpiece into a warm home, gardens flourishing under her care. With roses and orchids and herbs, the library expanded with her collection until it became their shared sanctuary. The conservatory, always a conservatory, had been rebuilt to her specifications, filled with the white orchids that had witnessed the beginning of everything. Emma knelt on the tiled floor with William, their 2-year-old son, who was supposedly helping plant seeds but mostly making an enthusiastic mess. Catherine, barely 6 months old, watched contentedly from her basket, dark eyes tracking every movement with Spencer's characteristic intensity. "Mama, more dirt!" William demanded, his dark hair falling across his forehead exactly like his father's. "That's quite enough dirt, darling," Emma laughed, trying to wipe soil from his chubby hands. Spencer appeared in the doorway, still in riding clothes, and stopped. The sight of his family, his wife with her hair coming loose from its pins, their son covered in garden soil, their daughter cooing happily, made his chest tighten with an emotion so profound it took his breath away. He remembered the first time he'd seen Emma in a library during a rainstorm, ink-stained fingers and quick wit. He'd never imagined then that he'd have this, home, family, the kind of profound happiness he'd thought existed only in novels. He crossed to them, pulling Emma into his arms from behind. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Being forced into this marriage?" Spencer's laugh rumbled through his chest into hers. "I was never forced, Emma. I was finally freed. Your father tried to give me the wrong daughter. Fate corrected his mistake." That afternoon, by coincidence, Jessica and Christopher arrived for a visit. They'd been married 3 years as well, happy but less financially comfortable than they'd anticipated. Jessica was pregnant with their first child, glowing despite her simpler circumstances. Christopher adored her, she adored him, but they'd chosen the harder path. Over tea, Jessica apologized again for the scandal, the upheaval she'd caused. Emma took her sister's hands firmly. "You gave me the greatest gift. You freed both of us to be with who we were meant for." "You really are happy?" Jessica's eyes shimmered with tears. "With him? I worried I'd ruined your life." Emma told her the full story then. The rainstorm meeting 4 years before the engagement, Spencer's choice of her over Jessica, their father's cruel rejection. Jessica sat stunned. "He wanted you all along? And father said no?" Emma nodded. "He thought you were better suited to be a duchess." Jessica's laugh was bitter and sad at once. "I would have been a terrible duchess. You're perfect for it. For him. I knew I wasn't right for Spencer. He was always so serious, so intellectual. I felt inadequate every time he looked at me." She squeezed Emma's hands. "Running away was cowardly, but it was also honest. I knew I'd make us both miserable." "You were brave," Emma said firmly. "You chose love over duty." So did you, in the end. No, Emma corrected gently. I chose duty. Love was the unexpected gift. After Jessica and Christopher departed, Emma and Spencer stood on the terrace overlooking the sea. The children slept inside, the house quiet around them. Stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same constellations they discussed that rainy afternoon so long ago. What would your life have been like if Jessica hadn't eloped? Spencer asked quietly. Emma considered. I'd be the spinster aunt, managing Barry House, reading books, tending roses, growing old never knowing what this feels like. And I'd be trapped with Jessica, pining for her sister, respectable but hollow, proper but miserable. Spencer pulled Emma closer. We would have been close to happiness but never touching it, seeing each other at family gatherings, wanting what we couldn't have. Perhaps Jessica's abandonment was the kindest thing she ever did, Emma mused. Her selfishness gave me you. It makes every moment of scandal worthwhile. Emma laughed. You're absurdly romantic for a man who claimed to be pragmatic. Spencer's smile was wicked. Pragmatically speaking, you're the most valuable asset I've ever acquired. I'm not an asset. Romantically speaking, he continued, pulling her flush against him, you're the love of my life, and I will spend every remaining day proving it. A small voice interrupted from the doorway. Papa! Mama! Can't sleep! William toddled onto the terrace in his nightclothes, clutching his stuffed horse. They scooped him up together, his small arms wrapping around both their necks, and Emma felt the perfection of the moment settle into her bones. This was what she'd been meant for, not managing households or being overlooked, but this family, this love, this life. Years passed like pages turning in a beloved book. Emma and Spencer grew older together, silver threading through their dark hair. Hollingsworth Hall filled with children, then grandchildren, laughter and life and warmth replacing the cold formality of previous generations. Late one night, decades after that scandalous wedding, Emma lay in Spencer's arms in their bed. The same bed where they'd first made love, where they'd conceived their children, where they'd weathered storms both literal and metaphorical. I was never the substitute, she whispered against his chest. Spencer's arms tightened around her. Never. You were always mine, from the moment I saw you, before I knew your name. Perhaps from the moment we were born, moving through the world toward this. Toward each other, Emma agreed. Toward home. Spencer kissed her hair, breathing in the familiar scent that had meant home to him for so many years. You are my home, Emma. Always have been. She smiled, eyes closing, safe in the arms of the man who'd chosen her first. And you are mine. Outside, waves crashed against the cliffs with their eternal rhythm. Inside, two people who had found each other twice, once in a rainstorm, once in scandal, slept peacefully in the home they'd built together. The substitute bride who was never a substitute at all. The Duke who'd admitted he only wanted her. And the love that proved sometimes being forced into something is really being freed into everything that matters. In the conservatory below, white orchids bloomed in the moonlight, bearing witness to the life that had grown from a single Thursday morning when a crystal vase shattered and everything changed. Some things break so that better things can take their place. Some wrong brides turn out to be exactly right. And some love stories begin with endings that are really just the start of forever.